Today is May 7th. Welcome to Big Book Daily. My name is Rob. I am an alcoholic. It's a thrill, honor, and joy to be here with you today as we journey through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. Today, at the core text, we're going to finish up more about alcoholism by reading page 42 and 43 and begin We Agnostics, chapter 4, by reading page 44. Out of the personal stories, we're going to begin a new story called Me, an Alcoholic, pages 382 through 384. And finally, out of the 12 and 12, we're going to continue our journey through tradition number 2 by reading the bottom of 135 to 136. So with that, my friends, hope you're doing well this morning. We have been given a brand new set of 24 hours, and it just feels good to be sober today. So with that, let's get to the good stuff. All right, my friends, so on page 42 of More About Alcoholism, our friend Fred here, he finally realizes that even though he had self-knowledge, he relapsed, and he says, I'd never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated, but I knew then, and it was a crushing blow. So page 42. 2 of the members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so much, and then asked me if I thought myself an alcoholic, and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede both propositions. They piled on me heaps of evidence to the effect that an alcoholic mentality, such as I had exhibited in Washington, was a hopeless condition. They cited cases out of their own experience by the dozen. This process snuffed out the last flicker of conviction that I could do the job myself. Then they outlined the spiritual answer and program of action which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. It meant that I would have to throw several lifelong conceptions out of the window. And that was not easy. But the moment I made up my mind to go through the process, I had the curious feeling that my alcoholic condition was relieved, as in fact it proved to be. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. I had been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying, and, I hope, more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst that I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. Fred's story speaks for itself. We hope it strikes home to thousands like him. He had only felt the first nip of the ringer. Most alcoholics have to be pretty badly mangled before they really commence to solve their problems. Many doctors and psychiatrists agree with our conclusions. One of these men, staff member of a world-renowned hospital, recently made this statement to some of us. What you say about general hopelessness of the average alcoholic's plight is, in my opinion, correct. As to 2 of you men, whose stories I have heard, there is no doubt in my mind that you are 100% hopeless, apart from divine help. Had you offered yourselves as patients at this hospital, I would not have taken you, if I'd been able to avoid it. People like you are too heartbreaking. Though not a religious person, I have profound respect for the spiritual approach in such cases as yours. For most cases, there is virtually no other solution. Once more, the alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Except for in a few rare cases, neither he nor any other human being can provide such a defense. His defense must come from a higher power. Chapter 4. We Agnostics. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope that we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find that you cannot quit entirely, or if, when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. To one who feels he is an atheist or an agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope that we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But cheer up. Something like half of us thought that we were atheists or agnostics. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. Personal Stories Part 2, Story number 13, Me, an Alcoholic, page 382. Me, an alcoholic? Alcohol's ringer squeezed this author, but he escaped quite whole. When I try to reconstruct what my life was like before, I can see a coin with two faces. One, the side I turned to myself in the world, was respectable, even in some ways distinguished. I was a father, husband, taxpayer, homeowner. I was a clubman, athlete, artist, musician, author, editor, aircraft pilot, and world traveler. I was listed in the who's who in America, as an American who, by distinguished achievement, had arrived. The other side of the coin was sinister, baffling. I was inwardly unhappy most of the time. There will be times when the life of respectability and achievement seemed insufferably dull. I had to break out. This I would do by going completely bohemian for a night, getting drunk, and rolling home with the dawn. Next day, remorse would be on me like a tiger. I'd claw my way back to respectability and stay there until the inevitable next time. The insidiousness of alcoholism is an appalling thing. In all the 25 years of my drinking, there were only a few occasions when I took a morning drink. My binges were one-night stands only. Once or twice during my early drinking, I carried it over into the second day. And only once, that I can remember, did it continue into the third. I was never drunk on the job, never missed a day's work, was seldom rendered totally ineffective by a hangover, and kept my liquor expenses well within my adequate budget. I continued to advance in my chosen field. How could such a man possibly be called an alcoholic? Whatever the root of my unhappiness might turn out to be, I thought, it could not possibly be booze. Of course I drank. Everybody did in the set which I've regarded as the apex of civilization. My wife loved to drink, and we tied on many a hooter in the name of marital bliss. My associates and all the wits and literary lights I so much admired also drank. Evening cocktails were as standard as morning coffee, and I suppose my average daily consumption ran a little more or less than a pint. Even on my rare, at first, binge nights, it never ran much over a quart. How easy it was in the beginning to forget that those binges ever happened. After a day or two of groveling remorse, I'd come up with an explanation. The nervous tension had piled up and just had to spill over. Or my physical plan had gotten a little run down and the stuff rushed right to my head. Or I got to talking and forgot how many I was taking, and it hit me. Always we'd emerge with a new formula for avoiding future trouble. You've got to space your drinks and take plenty of water in between. Or coat the stomach with a little olive oil. Or drink anything but those martinis. Weeks would go by without any further trouble, and I'd be assured that I'd at last hit on the right formula. The binge had been just one of those things. After a month, it seemed unlikely that it even happened. Intervals between binges were 8 months. My growing inward unhappiness was a very real thing, however, and I knew that something would have to be done about it. A friend had found help in psychoanalysis. After a particularly ugly one-nighter, my wife suggested I try it, and I agreed. Educated child of the scientific age that I was, I had complete faith in the science of the mind. It would be a sure cure, and also an adventure. How exciting to learn the inward mysteries that govern the behavior of people. How wonderful to know at last all about myself. To cut a long story short, I spent 7 years and $10,000 on my psychiatric adventure and emerged in worse condition than ever. To be sure, I learned many fascinating things and many things that were to prove helpful later on. I learned what a devastating effect it can have on a child to coddle him and build him up and then turn and beat him savagely, as it happened to me. Meanwhile, I was getting worse, both as regards my inward misery and my drinking. My daily alcoholic consumption remained about the same through all this, with perhaps a slight increase, and my binges remained one-nighters. But they were occurring with alarming frequency. In 7 years, the intervals between them decreased from 8 months to 10 days, and they were growing uglier. One night, I barely made my downtown club. If I'd had to go another 50 feet, I'd have collapsed in the gutter. On another occasion, I arrived home covered with blood. I deliberately smashed a window. With all of this, it was becoming increasingly hard to maintain my front of distinction and respectability to the world. My personality was stretched almost to splitting in the effort. Schizophrenia stared me in the face, and one night, I was in a suicidal despair. All right, my friends, finally we're on tradition number 2. For our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in our group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. Bottom of 135. When AA was only 3 years old, an event occurred demonstrating this principle. One of the first members of AA, entirely contrary to his own desires, was obliged to conform to a group opinion. Here is the story in his words. One day I was doing a 12-step job at a hospital in New York. The proprietor, Charlie, summoned me to his office. "Bill," he said, "I think it's a shame that you are financially so hard up. All around you, these drunks are getting well and making money. But you're giving this work full time and you're broke. It isn't fair." Charlie fished in his desk and came up with an old financial statement. Handing it to me, he continued, "This shows the kind of money the hospital used to make back in the 1920s. Thousands of dollars a month. It should be doing just as well now, and it would if only you'd help me. So why don't you move your work in here? I'll give you an office, a decent drawing account, and a very healthy slice of the profits." 3 years ago, when my head doctor Silkworth began to tell me the idea of helping drunks by spirituality, I thought it was crackpot stuff. But I've changed my mind. Someday this bunch of ex-drunks of yours will fill Madison Square Garden, and I don't see why you should have to starve meanwhile. What I propose is perfectly ethical. You can become a lay therapist, and more successful than anybody in the business. I was bowled over. There were a few twinges of conscience until I saw how really ethical Charlie's proposal was. There was nothing wrong whatever with becoming a lay therapist. I thought of Lois coming home exhausted from the department store each day, only to cook up supper for a house full of drunks who weren't paying board. I thought of a large sum of money still owing my Wall Street creditors. I thought of a few of my alcoholic friends who are making as much money as ever. Why shouldn't I do as well as they? All right, so a lot of reading today, my friends, so I'll keep this very brief. Bill asked a great question. We'll find out what happens particularly tomorrow with that. Why shouldn't I get paid to do all this? I'm doing all these things, and it's very tempting, especially my poor wife's working her butt off right now. And then she comes home and cooks dinner for these alcoholics. She needs help. We need financial help here. So it's a very tempting proposal. But there might be a reason why he doesn't take the position. And finally, so we learn here on the end of more about alcoholism. The alcoholic at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink. Doesn't mean that we're weak. It's just if we're true alcoholics, self-knowledge, it helps, but it's not the end-all cure-all. At least it hasn't been for me. And it says right here, his defense must come from a higher power. And that does sound like such a fluffy, non-practical solution. But my friends, all I can say is that, in my experience at least, that has been correct. And I've heard it in many people in the rooms. And then I love how chapter 4 begins with we agnostics. Chapter 3 ends with the words higher power. Now that is going to make a lot of people bristle. And then it follows up with chapter 4, talking about this whole higher power situation and simply keeping an open mind. Because we have all these kinds of prejudices, I'm sure, when we hear the word God or higher power. So this addresses that in chapter 4. And these chapters are arranged in order for a reason. So we will explore more of that tomorrow. My friends, it is a thrill and it's an honor to be here. Truly, I thank the God of my understanding so much just to be alive today and just to have the honor to do something like this, just to read and carry the message here. It's an honor. And if it's not helping anybody else, at least it's helping me, and I'm grateful for that. And if you're listening and you're sober today, you're a miracle. And those who love you are very proud of you. I hope you all have a great one. And if we are given another set of 24 hours, I look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow.